Thank you, Dr. Costa. Well, population growth is definitely an important issue, and I find that we don't talk about it as much as we used to, so it's definitely an important one. The next question comes from a gentleman in the back with the shirt, please.
Yes, Jorge Conservation International. I think that part of the problem here is that most people don't feel that planetary boundaries affect them in their daily lives. Maybe they do, they do. These things affect people, but not in a critical way. And I want to throw out some ideas there about slightly pessimistic scenarios. If we look at history, most of the revolutions that have happened in history have had kind of catastrophic events triggered them. And so I just want to point out that maybe we need a big environmental catastrophe for politicians to start paying attention to the planetary boundaries question, because unless, you know, several 100,000 people, maybe millions die because of one of these tipping points being reached and exceeded, it doesn't matter how much we talk in these meetings that we have to do it, politicians won't pay attention because of the gradual nature of the problem. So I just want to get your opinion.
Thank you. I think that's a very important point. I would like to give the next speaker in the back. You have been waiting for some time, so please, the microphone.
My name is Asim Srivastava. I'm from India. I'm trained as an environmental economist. I'm not going to defend economics. I actually am a renegade economist. I quit the economics profession some 15 years ago. I moved to philosophy, and I want to make a comment on what makes it so easy for us to insulate ourselves from the consequences of our actions. I think that all of us live in a bubble, and I think that the set of policies which have led us here is not up for discussion in this conference. I've made a presentation yesterday, which was fairly well attended, but unfortunately there is no follow-up of that sort of thing. Unless you discuss macroeconomic policy, the whole set of macroeconomic policies all the way since 1971, which have actually enriched global finance and which have created this massive inequality in the world, and which have actually awarded consequences to one set of people and benefits to another set of people. Unless we're willing to discuss that, all this is quite vain, I'm afraid. So there's a lot more to say, but I'll just say that.
Thank you very much. Yes, we all live in a bubble, and we're all caught in our own experience. Anybody want to comment on that?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Just a quick comment.
First, about crises or catastrophes. I think we all are very well aware of that there are many risks, both of social character and environment and climate. I guess the thing that drives us is we would like to avoid these because they would have such serious consequences, at least some of them. But you're right when you look at history, and if I look at the history of the European Union, just to be a little bit pedestrian, the European Union didn't have a foreign policy at all before the Balkan crisis in the 1990s. And we were sitting there looking how people slaughtered each other. And it was only afterwards that we started to formulate some kind of joint foreign policies to be better prepared for these kind of events. We didn't have an energy policy worth name until Russia cut off the gas to Ukraine in January 2006. And that affected some of the households in part of Western Europe as well. And then all of a sudden, a lot of colleagues, I was in the European Parliament, who had dismissed the whole notion of a joint European energy policy, started to say, oh, why don't we have that? So you're absolutely right. There is a need for crisis somehow to really prompt change. But again, just imagine that the Arctic ice would disappear. Johan told me the other day that the best metaphor is that the whole air conditioning system of the Earth would sort of somehow disappear, and it would have colossal consequences. The other issue, I tried to allude to what you said when we had this presidential so-called debate today. I absolutely agree with you. The economic framework is unjust, it's perverse, and it can no longer go on. And the way banks create credits, it's just insane. I give you a figure. In 1970, the British banks, although the UK banks, their lending was equal to 52% of GDP. Last year, the lending was 497% of GDP. So a 10 doubling in 40 years. No wonder. And then the other piece of information is also interesting. Most of that new credit have not gone to productive investments. It's gone to property and speculation. So the whole system is absurd, but it's like a Ponzi scheme. And I think that's why politicians are so scared. Because they know if they start interfering, it might collapse. And by the way, I also happen to know from having been a legislator myself, 99% of the members of parliaments and congresses and all over the world, they don't know how the financial system works. They don't have a clue. So they are very much afraid to say something, because then they would show their ignorance. So this is a real risky situation. There are such a few number of people who know how this system works, and yet it dominates so much. So I absolutely agree with you. If I'm elected, we're gonna focus on this.
Well, these are very important things to discuss. I think we slowly have to start rounding this up. Time is soon out. If you have a very brief comment, Matthias.
I do. Yes, a very brief comment. I do think we have certain urgencies that we can communicate. This has to do with versionizing truth. And we do have, I think, again, we're lacking a sense of urgency. I mean, let's face it, 50 to 100 million sharks, for example, are killed every year. And this in itself is such a huge tragedy for our ecosystems. And we just had Sylvia Earle in the audience. She just left, unfortunately, but she would agree that unless we safeguard the healthy relationship or safeguard the oceans, we're in real a huge dilemma. So I think it has to do with, again, versionizing, packaging the truth that's there. We don't have to wait for a tragedy. We're in the midst of a tragedy. But we don't need to be defeatist. We just have to be very intelligent and work this. But I feel all possible sense of urgency. Just come to me if you doubt it.
Short comment by James, and then a final statement of Johan.
Okay, so as a psychologist in the room, I'll tell you the issue. And it more comes from just having daughters than being a psychologist. So people are motivated through core values. So there's an issue here about shaping core values in education. People operate, you want people to operate from enlightened self-interest. So you have this emotional connection and cause and effect. And you can make a very compelling case in this area for core values, making an emotional connection and understanding the cause and consequence of mankind's impact on planet Earth. So just the last thing I wanted to say is that Peter Barker, as you would imagine, has a solution in this area. Again, he's not going to wait till your daughters get it. He's going to get an MBA of the future going very quickly with other stakeholders. So as we put our future business leaders through, they now will start to understand it's not just financial capital, it's about social and natural capital and changing corporations, taking an integrated approach. So I know he's moving very quickly in that area as well. And I know he will want to involve many other stakeholders in that process. So thanks very much.
Yes, thank you. And our final statement from Johan.
So thanks, and thanks everyone. Thanks for the panel, and thanks for your thoughtful reflections and questions. Just a couple of reflections from my side before closing. When I presented this science a little bit deeper just a week back, I got a comment from one of your members, James, the CEO of Nestlé, who said, "Don't worry, Johan, about the gloomy message you're given, because my definition is that a pessimist is a well-informed optimist. And I said, I abide to that. That I thought was a very good definition. But it kind of goes with exactly what I think the kind of breaking point of the discussion right now is, either we take in just a fraction of the science we have and we continue doing as well as we can on an incremental mode, or we take in the full integrated picture and we configure ourselves in a transformative mode. And I think to release innovation and release new ideas and to kind of put a shockwave into forceful new ideas is through that transition. I always find it a remarkable story that, in 1946 to 1948, essentially all the UN agencies we know were established. Over 3 years after the Second World War, everything we know of the current global governance system was just bang thrown in place as a result of a world crisis coming out of the Second World War. And now we cannot even agree on the status of the UN. We gather 110 heads of state, and we cannot even change it on the margin to give it a little teeny bit more power. So of course there's a need to use crises as opportunities, but as Anders points out, nobody knows how to refreeze the Greenland ice sheet. So there are some crises that are not allowed to happen. We simply have to navigate ourselves free from tipping points. So that's the only thing Planetary Boundaries does. It can guide us to avoid the unacceptable crisis, and otherwise use crises as opportunities. My final just message to you is just, I find that, when I step out of my science clothes, when if you really take the Planetary Boundaries science seriously, just think of the implications and just kind of creatively let's together think of the paradigm. If we suddenly have to respect a finite carbon budget, a finite freshwater budget, not allow agriculture to expand, a finite nitrogen budget, and everyone needs to accept that things have to add up to these absolute numbers because Mother Earth requires it for us, for our modern world, that totally changes things. Putting price on nature won't help us, because putting price on nature will not make the market have things add up. It requires what Ashok and Anders and everyone in Cyril points out, an ethical sharing of the remaining beauty on Earth. And that's a totally new notion. So I just think it's important for us to think of ourselves that we are in this pivotal moment in human history when we know for the first time that something new has to happen, which certainly is not going back to the caves, it's simply a new type of well-being. And I think that is, in a way, kind of a transitional type of paradigm. And I find it so reassuring when Asher points out, every religion, every belief system fundamentally has these universal values. It's not as if we always propel the differences between cultures and religions and nations, but fundamentally we share some universal values, and perhaps we need to dig ourselves back to that core. So to me this has been very enriching, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
So you